When those two stories came in, chilling, didn't even begin to cover it. We're diving deep today into not just the spooky stuff, but that unsettling feeling of obsession where things aren't always what they seem.
And what really struck me is how both of these stories tap into something very primal. That fear of losing control, of being watched, of even being manipulated.
It's like that feeling you get, when you think you're alone, but then you're not.
Mm-hmm. So here goes the first story. My sister's ex-boyfriend keeps showing up at family events. She's been dead for 2 years. When my sister Lisa died 2 years ago, our family changed forever. We weren't perfect before, who is? But Lisa's death fractured us. My dad barely speaks anymore. My mom busies herself with every charity event she can find, and I've been stuck. Angry, looking for someone to blame. Lisa was the glue that held us together. She was warm, outgoing, always laughing. The kind of person people gravitate to. She loved hiking, photography, and the outdoors. Her death, officially ruled an accident, was almost poetic. She slipped while hiking and fell into a ravine. At least, that's what the police report said. But if that's true, why does it feel like her ghost never left? Lisa's ex-boyfriend, Matt, was never part of our family. He and Lisa dated for about a year before she broke it off. She said he was controlling, obsessive, constantly texting, showing up unannounced, making passive-aggressive comments when she spent time with her friends. I remember her joking about it once, calling him my stage 5 clinger. But it wasn't funny. Not really. After the breakup, Matt didn't take it well. He kept texting her, leaving voicemails, even sending her flowers at work. She brushed it off, said he'd get bored eventually. I thought she was right. Until the funeral. Matt didn't come to the service, thank God. But a week later, he showed up on our doorstep. It was a rainy Thursday. My mom opened the door and there he was, holding a bouquet of lilies, Lisa's favorite. I just wanted to pay my respects, he said. His voice was soft, his head tilted like he was trying to look vulnerable. My mom, who has never been good at saying no, let him in. Matt sat on our couch, talking about Lisa as if he knew her better than we did. He described her laugh, her smile, the way she always ordered pancakes with extra syrup. My dad stayed silent, his jaw tight. When Matt finally left, I asked my mom why she let him in. He's grieving too, she said. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Matt wasn't grieving. He was lurking. Over the next few months, Matt kept appearing. He showed up at family barbecues, holiday dinners, even my dad's birthday party. Always uninvited, always with some excuse. Your mom said it was okay, he'd claim, or I thought Lisa would have wanted me here. My parents, blinded by their own grief, let it slide. He's harmless, my mom said. He just misses her. But it wasn't harmless. Not when he started asking questions. Last Christmas, Matt cornered me in the kitchen. She was different with me, he said, leaning against the counter. I stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? He smiled, that thin, unsettling smile I'd seen so many times. She told me things she wouldn't tell anyone else. Like what? His smile widened. Like how she wasn't scared to die. That night, I went through Lisa's journals. She was the type to write everything down, her thoughts, her plans, even little grocery lists. Most of it was normal Lisa stuff, song lyrics, doodles, random observations. But then I found the entry. I think Matt's been following me. He won't stop texting. Keeps saying he knows something I don't. I'm starting to feel like I can't shake him. I showed it to my mom, expecting her to finally see reason. But she waved it off. Lisa was dramatic sometimes, she said. I'm sure it's nothing. A few days later, I saw Matt's car parked down the street. It wasn't the first time. I'd noticed it before, idling near the corner, but I convinced myself it was a coincidence. This time, though, I knew. He wasn't watching our family. He was watching me. Last week was my dad's birthday. Matt showed up, holding a gift he claimed Lisa would have bought, a coffee table book about hiking trails. I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted him outside, away from my parents. What the hell are you doing here? I snapped. His smile didn't falter. Paying my respects, he said. Lisa broke up with you. She wanted nothing to do with you. Why can't you let her go? His eyes darkened. She told you that? Yes. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. She told me a lot of things too. Things she didn't tell anyone else. Then he said something I'll never forget. I was there, you know, on the trail. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. What? He smiled again, a cold, empty thing. She didn't fall. She looked me in the eyes and asked me to let her go. My stomach churned. You're lying. He tilted his head, studying me. Am I? Ask yourself this. If she slipped, why didn't she scream? I called the police that night. I told them everything, the stalking, the journal, his confession. When they went to his apartment the next morning, it was empty. No furniture, no clothes, no sign he'd ever lived there. It's been a week now. I haven't told my parents what he said. I don't know if they'd believe me. Every night, I double-check the locks. Every night, I sit in my bed, clutching my phone, too scared to sleep. Last night, I finally decided to look through Lisa's journals again. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I missed something. Maybe I was looking for answers. But this time, there was something new. The last page, which had been blank before, now had a single sentence scrawled across it in jagged black ink. He's not watching. He's inside.
Here goes the second story. I quit my job as a public defender a couple of years ago, because I met a client, let's call him Isaac, whose case made me question my own sanity. Now, after all this time, I need to share his story. People may be in danger, including myself. Or perhaps I'm freaking out over nothing. I hope so. When we first met, I had Isaac write down his version of events in as much detail as possible. What follows is his account. About 5 months ago, I woke up one morning with a persistent itch under my right eye. When I looked in the mirror, I found a red mark on my eyelid and thought maybe I'd scratched myself during one of my stress dreams. I didn't think much of it, but then it started to look infected. Every day for weeks I would take stock of the blemish in the mirror. Every day it would get nastier. Kept telling myself it would probably heal on its own while it grew into a yellowish lump the size of a grape. Looked at all kinds of horrors on WebMD, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I felt it when I blinked. That's when business started to dry up. I'd been flipping cars on Craigslist with my buddy Lucas. He had the mechanical know-how and handled logistics, while I'd go out and work my charm, make deals. It's important not to look like a skis bag in that line of work, and suddenly I couldn't unload this Nissan Altima on anybody. People looked at me different. Got skittish. Lucas stopped returning my texts. The gall of the man. He lived in the apartment directly below mine. I could hear his life, his shouting matches with his girlfriend Polly, his toddler Ophelia throwing fits, his Doberman barking at nothing. We would have a relationship whether he liked it or not. Even the old, gray cat stopped coming around. I called him Gravy. He was a long-haired fella that would waltz into my place through the window above the fire escape. I lived on the 4th floor. I'd feed him licks of vanilla ice cream during that sweltering summer. He probably belonged to somebody. I had to wonder if he stopped returning because of my face. And yeah, I must admit, I was nearly dead broke after making a few bad bets on DraftKings. Couldn't make rent or my phone bill. So that's why I never made a doctor's appointment. Knew in the back of my mind that if things got desperate, I would have to go to the pawn shop to loan my prized Rolex. Again. It was my only real asset. I slept with it on. And finally, the wasp appeared. It got stuck inside the dome of the light fixture above my bed. Didn't know that was possible. With the light on, I could see its body in silhouette, its big-ass stinger. It bounced around, tapping the glass when I tried to sleep. And that was the night I started to lose it. Like goddamn, why me? There's always some bullshit. Can't catch a goddamn break. All these little indignities had piled up, and now I had this wellspring of venom spilling out of me. Paced around cursing, checking the mirror over and over, looking at my ugly mug, rapping my knuckles on my head, turning the light on and off, watching the wasp crawl in its cage. The next morning, I went to Lucas's to confront him. The dog went nuts as soon as I knocked, and when Lucas answered with Ophelia on his hip, she started crying at the sight of me. Polly dragged the dog and kid away, and I was pissed. And when I get pissed, I get to ranting, and I ranted about all this stuff: the wasp, the cat, his dog, my face, him ghosting me, DraftKings, and the whole time he couldn't look me in the eye. He constantly sniffled and rubbed his nose. This nervous tic made him look pathetic. I couldn't fathom how he'd get along without me. To my surprise, he cut me off and said, "Isaac, I'm not giving you money, man." And you know why? He knew I would ask. Then he looked at my blemish and his expression flickered. Seemed he was cycling through several emotions. I read them as queasiness, worry, and then contempt. He sniffed and said, "I can see you're in trouble. Go see Sylvia in 205. She'll help." No other explanation. He shut the door in my stunned face. Well, I assumed it was about my skin problem, and he just didn't want to say it. So, I moseyed down to 205, knocked, and this tiny, wrinkled woman, maybe 80 years old, let me in. She was a hoarder. The place was cluttered with potted plants, newspapers, and all kinds of knickknacks and pieces of junk. I remember lamps made from blown glass. Jewelry and letters strewn on the coffee table along with a fancy letter opener. A metal ring puzzle. Family photos and abstract paintings covering the walls from floor to ceiling. A bowling trophy. A marble bust. Fine china displayed in a cabinet. A PhD placard for folklore studies. A dog bone. A dream catcher in the window. She shuffled over and sat cross-legged on the floor. By the way she dressed, wearing this red, silky robe thing and feather earrings, she seemed a bit new agey. I figured she'd give me a salve made from tree bark or some shit. When you're in a crisis, you start to look everywhere for a solution, even towards mumbo-jumbo. But she didn't say a thing for the longest time, so I filled the dead air with my rant again. She finally said in her croaky old woman voice, "Give me the wasp." "What do you mean?" "Give me the wasp." We stared at each other for a long moment. It seemed like her eyes pointed in two different directions, just slightly. "I thought you would help with my whole facial issue," I said. "Give me the wasp." I couldn't pry anything else out of her. She just repeated it over and over, and I was fuming, like, is this a joke? Does she have dementia? Eventually, I zipped out of there and my spite carried me back to my apartment. I unscrewed the light fixture and after stalking it for 2 minutes, captured the wasp in a Tupperware container. Then I returned to old Sylvia. She didn't say shit as I brandished the container at her. So I opened it. Let the wasp float out into her place. "There's your wasp." No reaction. She only stared at me. Not so much as a shadow of an expression. I left with my fury peaking and simmering down into this cold nothing. A day later, I went out to the pawnshop to loan out my precious watch. But when it got to the parking lot, I spotted a glint on the pavement, a diamond ring. I hurried and pawned it for $800. Later, I won $1,000 on DraftKings. And over the next couple days the gnarly spot on my face began to clear up. It receded back into a small red dot, though it still itched a bit. I paid rent and sold the Nissan. Couldn't help but connect my strange interaction with Sylvia to my turn of luck. I enjoyed a week of normalcy before the spot returned with a vengeance. But not a lump this time. It quickly spread out into a flat, yellow-brown splotch, like a bruise on an apple. One morning I poked the flesh with my pinky, and I can only describe it now as too soft. My finger left an impression that lingered like memory foam. Almost threw up right then. Decided to go to urgent care. But my keys were missing. In a nauseous panic, I tore up my whole apartment, my closet, my dresser, and the furniture. What did I find? 1. A couple of mysterious blood stains on the carpet that I'd never noticed before, small and round. 2. Fat cockroaches in the couch cushions. And I thought of Sylvia, sitting there in the corner of my mind, expressionless. Couldn't dislodge her. I thought maybe I would apologize for the wasp, to cover my bases. Realign my karma. I was a bit dizzy. I clenched my teeth and went down to apartment 205. Again, she let me in and sat on the rug. Again, I filled the silence, rambling about my problems. She said, "Bring me the cockroaches." "What's your deal?" "Bring me the cockroaches." "Are you all right?" I raised my voice at her. "Bring me the cockroaches." And on and on. What can I say? They were harder to capture than the wasp, but I corralled 2 cockroaches in the Tupperware container and returned to Sylvia. This time, I knelt, sort of bowed to her, and placed the container at her feet. Thought I was making peace with her. Caught a whiff of her, earthy. She had fuzz on her upper lip, liver spots. She breathed long and deep through her nose. Had this reptilian stillness. Her eyes, just a bit bloodshot in the corners. They followed my movements, but only after a short delay. Like when I stood back up, they looked into the empty space before flicking up at me. Didn't blink. It occurred to me that she was in some kind of meditative state. I walked to the door, and when I turned to say goodbye, her mouth hung open, yellow teeth on display, a glisten on her lips, maybe saliva. At this point, this dread congealed in me. Left feeling weak. I decided to walk the 4 miles to urgent care. Clear my head and get some fresh air. By the time anybody would see me, they looked at me like I was a moron because the thing on my face had gone back to a somewhat normal color and reduced dramatically in size. Looked like a standard bruise. They told me to see a dermatologist. And over the next few weeks, I watched the blemish shrink back into a red speck. Almost didn't want it to happen because it just wasn't normal. I was stuck in this psychedelic headspace, checking the mirror every 2 minutes. After staring into the mirror for a while, my vision would go blurry and I'd think it was there again. I couldn't bottle my nerves. One evening I went over and knocked on Lucas's door, but he wouldn't answer. Started slamming on his door and yelling, "What's with Sylvia, bro? Answer me." No response, but I heard Ophelia crying, so I knew he was there. I banged on the door hard. "Some weird shit's going on and I'm not having it anymore." I stood there listening for a long while. Once Ophelia stopped crying, there was silence. I won something like $4,000 on the sportsbook apps. Never found my keys. And the roach infestation was gone. The whole time slack-jawed Sylvia was there in the back of my mind watching my life. Had an appointment with a dermatologist scheduled in a couple goddamn months. I prayed to God that this was just a weird episode, and things could go back to normal. No. A few days later, I woke up at 3 a.m. with my face itching. Something smelled like sweaty feet and my skin was wet. Checked the mirror, and my stomach dropped. Pus leaked out this wound, a hole in my eyelid. And I thought maybe I could see a bit of white. The white of my eyeball through the hole. I puked into the sink. Turned away spitting, couldn't look at it again. It was my face. I was losing my mind. I wanted to go back to urgent care, but I couldn't find my phone or shoes. Looked everywhere. Ran out of the apartment in a panic. Started knocking on doors. "I need help." Yelling, moaning. "Someone call me an ambulance." Nobody answered. Knocked on all the doors on my floor. "Where the fuck is everybody?" Not a peep. Went back into my apartment and slumped onto the couch. Noticed drops of dried blood scattered all over the carpet. Sat for a long time waiting for something to happen. Maybe for the police to show up. Tried to calm down. Tried to tell myself that I wasn't dying. Went to the fridge, but my damn ice cream was missing. Blood drops on the linoleum, too. Grabbed a bottle of Jameson and drank until I got really tired. This confusion hit me. Dissociative. Almost didn't know where I was. Heart went crazy. There's nothing else like it, the feeling that you're having a psychotic break. It's damnation. Sylvia was out there, watching me through the cement and drywall. This rage, directed at her, started building in me. Rage was better than the confusion. I prowled around, bouncing off the walls until the inertia propelled me out the door. I took the bottle with me down to 205. banged on her door. When Sylvia opened it, I raved at her. I said that I wanted out. No more. Demanded she give my shoes back. I think I threatened to, kill her. She didn't flinch. Just shuffled back to her spot on the carpet and said something I couldn't hear. So I stepped closer into the apartment. The place smelled like cooked pork chops. Give me the watch. I hesitated. Give me the watch. I realized then I was a coward. I guess I sort of always knew in the back of my head. Please, just leave me the hell alone. I flung the Rolex into her lap and left. Stumbled back to my apartment and drank until I fell asleep. Spent maybe 4 weeks, the longest period yet, watching the thing heal. The hole disappeared and the blemish shrank down into the red dot. But it still itched. I still didn't have my phone, shoes, or keys. I only left my apartment to go to the corner store to buy ice cream, Oreos, Jameson, and like 1,000 scratchers. Won nearly $10,000. Counted the days until my dermatologist appointment. Woke up one morning to the smell of rot. Gathered my courage to look in the mirror. The bottom half of my eye was exposed. Lower eyelid gone, with the area around it necrotic black. My first reaction was to put my hand over it, because I thought it would fall out. I felt the wetness and I fainted. When I came to, I crawled into the living room. Gravy the cat stood perched on the fire escape. I coaxed him into my arms with a spoonful of ice cream. He purred and I wept as I cradled him. Soft, friendly guy. Sylvia was out there in her apartment, as still as a lizard, watching me. And I knew she was saying, "Bring me the cat." I went slow. Could barely walk straight. Took the stairs one at a time and thought, oh God, what will happen to Gravy when I give him to Sylvia? Every step I would pause and think about turning back, but I kept going. I had no other choice. I needed to save my face. Fought to stay upright, scratching Gravy's chin, telling him I was sorry, until I reached the landing and turned the corner. I saw something and crept back. Down the hall, Lucas held little Ophelia outside apartment 205. Polly's little girl Ophelia. 4 years old. Lucas knocked on the door and entered. I padded down the hall with Gravy still in my arms. Pressed my ear to the door. A muffled voice. A long pause. I stood behind the door when it opened again. Lucas stepped out, without Ophelia, and turned to find me. We both said something like, "Oh shit." His nose was bleeding. He held his hand up to it, but couldn't stop the flow down his lips. The blood had dyed his mustache and beard completely red, like a lioness's fur after feeding. Blood dripped off his chin onto the carpet. I stared until it hit me. The blood. "Have you been in my apartment?" I asked. He doubled over in laughter. Sounded like hiccups. Hick hick hick. Blood fell onto the floor in spurts. He coughed out, "Sylvia, wanted your ice cream," and laughed some more. I pivoted into the apartment. Sylvia sat on the floor with Ophelia in her lap. A string of drool dangled from her mouth onto Ophelia's hair, but Ophelia was oblivious, playing with the metal ring puzzle. Sylvia's eyes looked up to me. She placed Ophelia on the ground and stood. She took the letter opener and pulled it from its sheath, revealing a black blade. With her right hand she held the blade aloft. With her left hand she touched Ophelia's head. I threw Gravy at Sylvia. He landed claws first on her head. As Gravy raced down her back, his claws made this popping sound, tearing through her skin, but she barely reacted, moving her hands slowly, trying to catch him. I ran and grabbed Ophelia like a football. Sylvia tumbled over as I shoulder-checked her on my way to the window. I lunged out the window and onto the fire escape. All the way down, I begged little Ophelia to take her mom and escape, leave Lucas, leave the apartment. "Please, do you understand?" I asked her, but she beat on me with her little hands. I guess my face looked normal by the time the cops caught up with me several hours later. And Isaac looked normal by the time I came to see him. He was charged with kidnapping. After reading his tale, my first thought was that he obviously made up the whole thing in a stupid attempt to justify his actions. Then, after he assured me he wasn't lying, I thought maybe I would plead insanity for the first time in my career. But his case never made it to trial. Strange things began to happen. The cops found out that Polly, Lucas's girlfriend, had gone missing. And before they could figure out what was going on, they found Lucas covered in blood in his bed, expired. The detective in charge mentioned other missing people. When I asked him how many, he wouldn't say. I told him to visit Sylvia in 205. He told me that they had everything handled and to keep my nose out of it. Isaac told me that he had money for a better lawyer. He just needed help getting it from the bank. Shortly thereafter, he landed in the hospital. I never heard from him again. They wouldn't divulge the cause of death. Ophelia ended up with her aunt and uncle. None of the disappearances made the news. I called the detective again at some point. He told me not to go to the press. It could ruin the investigation. I thought it was a bogus threat, but I complied anyway. I tried to forget about it and move on. Why am I sharing this now? Because I think I did something stupid. Sylvia. She got stuck in my mind. Lodged in there. I've dreamt about her numerous times, even though I've never seen her. I had to know if she had anything to do with the disappearances. So, after all this time, about 2 years, I tracked down the apartment. Once I entered the lobby, I knew it was the right place, because I found a bulletin board with an old missing cat poster for Gandalf the long-haired cat. But when I saw it, I was overcome with a sense of dread. I left without visiting 205. I guess I'm a coward. The day after I visited, I got this big zit on the center of my nose. Now, I keep telling myself not to worry. But I check the mirror every 2 minutes. If you are loving listening to us so far, kindly subscribe and comment to keep encouraging us. Thank you. Alright, let's dive into the summary for those of us who might have missed some parts of the whole story.
Let's unpack this first one. My sister's ex-boyfriend keeps showing up at family events. She's been dead for 2 years. Even the title alone kind of sets off alarm bells.
It does, doesn't it? And right away, the person telling the story suspects that her sister's ex, Matt, might have been involved in her death. Even before we get to any details, that seed of doubt is planted.
And then those details, like Matt bringing her sister's favorite flowers, knowing things about her life that even close family wouldn't. Is it genuine grief or something more calculated?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, grieving is natural, but the way Matt's acting goes beyond that. He's inserting himself into the family's whole narrative of Lisa's life, almost like he's trying to control the story.
Yeah. It's like he's trying to replace her in their lives. Like he's becoming the one who knew her best. And then there are those comments he makes about Lisa supposedly not fearing death.
Mm-hmm.
It's subtle, but so unnerving.
Yeah, that's a classic manipulation tactic, planting seeds of doubt. He wants to make the narrator and maybe even the family question everything they thought they knew about Lisa.
And it works. She starts to doubt her own memories, her own judgment. Then we get to that gut punch moment where she finds Lisa's journal, and there's an entry where Lisa says she's afraid Matt is following her.
And this is where we see that tragic and common pattern in cases of stalking and harassment. The victim's fears are dismissed. Her mom just brushes it off as Lisa being dramatic. But we know better.
Exactly. We're right there with her, seeing those red flags. And then Matt drops the bombshell. He confesses to being at the scene of Lisa's death, contradicting the official reports.
And he does it in such a way that it raises more questions than answers. Did he actually do something to her? Or was he just a bystander? Or is this confession a total lie designed to just torment her further? The ambiguity is chilling.
It's like a game he's playing with her, using information as a weapon. And just when you think it can't get any creepier, Matt vanishes. The police can't find him, and she's stuck in this horrible in-between, wondering if her sister's death was an accident or something far worse.
Yeah, that lack of closure is more terrifying than any concrete answer. It preys on our need for resolution, for justice. It leaves the narrator and us, the audience, with this lingering sense of unease. What happened to Lisa? And where is Matt now?
And just when you think you can breathe again, we get that final gut punch from Lisa's journal. He's not watching. He's inside. What did that even mean?
That is brilliant psychological horror. It suggests that Matt has somehow infiltrated the family, become a part of their lives in a way that goes beyond a physical presence. And it leaves us with this unsettling question. How deep does Matt's obsession go?
Yeah, it's the kind of line that stays with you, making you look over your shoulder even when you're alone. This next story, a public defender's bizarre encounter, it takes us in a totally different direction.
This one's a fascinating blend of psychological thriller and almost folklore horror. We meet Isaac, who's plagued by this mysterious facial growth and just terrible luck.
And it's his friend Lucas who sends him to this.
Yep.
Well, they describe her as an eccentric old woman named Sylvia. But even the way she's described, living in this cluttered apartment, almost unmoving, her eyes just slightly delayed in tracking you. It's like straight out of a nightmare.
Sylvia embodies that archetype of the crone. Powerful, knowing, and also potentially dangerous. A figure who exists in that in-between space, the everyday world, and something.
And then there's this pattern, like a twisted bargain. Isaac's problems get worse and worse. He brings Sylvia something she requests, first a wasp, then cockroaches, and things get better for a bit, only for the cycle to start all over again.
It's that cyclical nature of his misfortunes that really gets to you. He's trapped, unable to escape this escalating series of events. And Sylvia, with her cryptic pronouncements and unsettling stillness, becomes the focal point of his desperation.
And the price she demands keeps getting higher and higher. It starts small, but then she wants his prized Rolex, his last valuable possession.
That's the Faustian element, isn't it? Isaac is so desperate for relief that he's willing to sacrifice anything, a piece of himself even, to escape what's happening to him.
And then it gets even darker when he sees Lucas taking his daughter, Ophelia, into Sylvia's apartment. Whatever Sylvia's doing, it's escalating. And now an innocent child is involved.
This is where the story shifts from unsettling to truly terrifying. The stakes are suddenly so much higher. What's going to happen to Ophelia? What will this woman do?
We're right there with Isaac as he sees Sylvia with Ophelia and a letter opener. He panics, throws his cat at her as a distraction, and manages to escape with Ophelia. It's chaotic, violent, and leaves us with so many questions about why Sylvia is doing this.
That cat-throwing incident, it's a stroke of genius, isn't it? It's darkly funny and injects a jolt of adrenaline into this tense situation, but it also highlights Isaac's desperation. I mean, he'll do anything to protect Ophelia.
And the aftermath is, Isaac gets arrested for kidnapping, Lucas dies mysteriously, Lucas' girlfriend Polly disappears, and we never learn what happened to Ophelia. And then, to top it all off, the public defender who's telling us this whole story starts to develop a facial growth, just like Isaac's.
That open ending is what makes this story so haunting. We're left with this string of unanswered questions. What was Sylvia doing? What happened to the missing people? Is the public defender in danger? It's like Sylvia's influence, whatever it is spreading, reaching out from the story to touch our narrator.
And he tried to investigate Sylvia more, but was just overcome with dread and warned off by the police. It suggests something much bigger and darker is going on than we first realize.
Yeah, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, and the truth, whatever it may be, is much more complex and terrifying than we can imagine. So I've got two stories that are unsettling in totally different ways. One is a very real threat, while the other ventures into the supernatural. But what's fascinating is how they both tap into our deepest fears about control, obsession, and the unknown.
Yeah, it's like we're looking at two sides of the same coin, right? Obsession, whether it's, from a person or something beyond our understanding, it can lead to some dark places.
Absolutely, and both stories play with this idea of isolation. In the first story, the woman telling the story, she's isolated by her grief, and she can't convince her family about Matt. And Isaac, in the second story, he's stuck in his apartment surrounded by these increasingly bizarre things happening to him.
Like isolation just breeds fear. And that fear then fuels the obsession. It becomes this vicious cycle.
Exactly. When we're cut off from other people, it's easier to give in to our anxieties to think we're being targeted, you know? Our minds start filling in the blanks, usually with the worst possible scenarios.
And that leads us to the heart of both of these stories. That fear of the unknown. Whether it's Matt's motives or Sylvia's power, it's the not knowing that really gets to you.
It's human nature, isn't it? Our brains want patterns, explanations. When we're faced with something we can't explain, it triggers fear. We get hyper-aware, looking for clues, trying to make sense of it all.
And these stories feed into that fear perfectly. They give you just enough information to make you wonder, to get you interested, but then they just leave you hanging, forcing you to think about the possibility that there might not be any answers.
It's the difference between a jump scare and genuine dread. These stories aren't trying to shock you, they're trying to unsettle you, to make you question what you think you know about the world and the people in it.
And it's even more disturbing because both stories kind of blur the line between what's real and what's not. Both people telling the stories start to question their own sanity, what they're seeing, as things get stranger and stranger.
That's psychological horror, isn't it? It makes you question your own grip on reality. Are these characters really going through these things, or are they imagining it?
Yeah, and the stories play with that so well. We're given just enough detail to make us think it could be real, but there's always that doubt that makes you think maybe there's another explanation.
And because there's no real ending in either story, it makes that uncertainty even stronger. We don't know what happened to Matt. We don't know what Sylvia is really about. We're left with this feeling that the story isn't really over, that the danger could still be out there.
It's like the authors are saying, hey, this could happen to you. What would you do?
Exactly. And that's why these stories work so well. They're not just entertainment. They make you think. They're invitations to look at the darker parts of ourselves and think about how people really behave.
And even though the stories are totally different in terms of what happens and the characters, there are some interesting connections between them.
Oh, absolutely. The most obvious one is obsession. Matt can't let go of Lisa even though she's dead, and Isaac is consumed by this thing growing on his face and all the weird stuff happening around him. Both of them need to understand, to control, but their obsession destroys them in the end.
And that ties into this theme of control, or really the lack of it. Both people telling the stories feel totally helpless to stop what's happening around them. They're at the mercy of forces they don't understand, let alone control.
And feeling powerless is really unsettling, right? It makes us feel vulnerable, exposed, like we're just pieces in some game we don't know the rules to.
And that vulnerability leads to paranoia and suspicion. We see it with the first narrator and how she doesn't trust Matt, and with Isaac thinking that Sylvia is behind everything happening in his life. But it makes us wonder, are they right to be paranoid? Or are they losing it?
That's what's so clever about these stories. They make you wonder, make you question yourself. They make you think about the possibility that sometimes the things that scare us most are the things we can't see or explain.
It's like the stories are peeling back the layers of our everyday world, showing us this dark, chaotic undercurrent that most of us don't want to think about. But it's there, just below the surface, waiting to break through.
And they're both really good at making it feel real, even with all the unsettling stuff. The first narrator, she describes Matt, how he acts, the things he says so clearly that you can practically see him. And Isaac's story about Sylvia, her apartment, the strange things she asks for, it all feels so real, like everyday life.
And it's that mix of the ordinary and the strange that makes them so unsettling. They take normal things, grief, bad luck, a weird old woman, and turn them into something dark and creepy.
It's like the stories are saying that the monsters aren't hiding in the dark. They're right there in plain sight, disguised as the people and things we see every day.
That's scary, isn't it? That the things that scare us most aren't the ones that go bump in the night, but the ones that mess with our minds, the ones that make us question if we're going crazy.
And both stories tap into this fear of being betrayed. The first narrator is betrayed by Matt, someone she thought she knew. And in the second story, it's Lucas who leads Isaac right to Sylvia and her manipulations.
It reminds you that the people we're closest to can be the ones that hurt us the most. Which is a scary thought, right? To think that the people we depend on, the people who should be protecting us, can be the ones that cause us the most pain.
Definitely. And that feeling of betrayal can really mess you up. It breaks down your sense of security and makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. It's like the rug's pulled out from under you and you're left trying to find something to hold on to.
Yeah, it's that feeling of like falling, you know? Everything you thought was real just disappears. And these stories, they really capture that feeling of being lost, that broken trust in such a real way.
They really do. And they make us think about some hard truths about people. You know, the ability to become obsessed, to manipulate, to betray, it's in all of us. It's a dark side that we try not to see, but these stories shine a light on it. They force us to admit it's there.
So, if we're all capable of this stuff, how do we protect ourselves? How do we live in a world where even the people we're closest to can hurt us?
Well, I think it starts with knowing yourself, understanding what makes you vulnerable, what sets you off. It can help you see dangerous situations and make better choices about who to trust and how to be in the world.
It's like learning to see the warning signs in other people and in ourselves, because sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we make up in our heads, the ones we put on other people.
Exactly. And that's where having good relationships matters. Surrounding yourself with people who will listen to you, who believe you, who offer a different view when you're spiraling, it can really help. It's about having a safety net, a group of people who can help you through the tough times and the uncertainty of life.
Because we can't control everything, right? There will always be things we don't know, things we can't explain, people who might betray us. But maybe that's part of life. Maybe it's about accepting that uncertainty, learning to live with the shadows instead of running from them.
I like that. It's about realizing that darkness is a part of being human just as much as light. It's not about pretending those dark parts don't exist, but about seeing them, understanding them, and making them part of how we see ourselves and the world.
Because these stories, even though they're scary, they're not meant to make us afraid. If anything, they're a wake-up call. They remind us to be careful, to trust our gut, to set boundaries, and to get help when we need it.
Absolutely. And to remember that we have a choice in how we react to fear. We can let it control us, or we can use it to grow and learn about ourselves.
So as we finish up our deep dive into these two chilling stories, I want to leave you with this. What stuck with you? What parts of these stories really got under your skin and why? What did you learn about yourself, about people, about the world we live in?
It's a lot to think about, but that's what's so great about these stories. They stay with you even after you're done reading or listening. They make you think more and maybe even look at yourself in a way that's not so comfortable.
And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the real horror isn't the stories themselves, but realizing that the darkness they show us is inside all of us. But by facing that darkness, by bringing it into the light, maybe we can find a way to rise above it, to turn it into something better, more caring, more human.
That's a powerful thought.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and remember, sometimes the most disturbing things we find are the ones closest to home.